Welcome, everyone, to Chasing Masculinity, the podcast where we explore what it means to live with purpose, integrity, and a strong foundation in faith. I'm your host, Colton Wutzke, and as always, I'm on this journey right alongside you. I'm not here to claim authority or preach as someone who has it all figured out. I'm just trying to navigate this path of masculinity, faith, and growth every day. I've experienced the wins and struggles. I'm learning what works, what doesn't, and how we can better ourselves along the way. Today, we're tackling an important and sometimes misunderstood aspect of relationships and marriage. This brings us to Rule 5 from my 24 Rules of Masculinity. You cannot seek a wife who serves her husband. Now, this isn't about rejecting service or love in marriage. It's about rejecting the misconception that a wife's role is to serve her husband out of duty. Instead, true marriage is about mutual servitude, where both partners love and serve each other unconditionally. In this episode, we'll break down the idea of mutual love and service in marriage and why it's so much more fulfilling than the traditional stereotype of a one-sided, servile relationship. We'll explore how cultural expectations of marriage have shifted and why seeking a wife who is your equal partner, not just someone who serves you, leads to a stronger, God-centered relationship. We'll also talk about the biblical foundation for marriage as a union of equals who both serve God and each other. We'll dive into practical ways this looks in real life, from daily acts of kindness to supporting each other's goals, and how the strength of a marriage comes from both people giving 100%, not just meeting halfway. These are all resources I've pulled from various secular and non-secular experts, so please do not mistake me as a relationship guru. By the end of this episode, I hope we'll all walk away with a clearer understanding of what it means to build a partnership based on mutual respect, love, and servitude, and why it leads to a more fulfilling life, not just for you, but for your spouse and for your faith. To give you some context, this is something I'm working on in my own relationship, striving not to see love as transactional or built on expectations, but as something that is shared equally, with each person supporting the other. Like everything we talk about on this podcast, it's not something I've mastered. It's something I'm just learning day by day. For today's podcast, I want to set the tone with none other than Ecclesiastes 4:12, which says, "Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken." This verse captures the essence of what true marriage is, a bond that includes God as its core, making it stronger, resilient, and built on love and mutual service. All right, let's get into today's main discussion, marriage and self-improvement. One of the biggest misconceptions people have about marriage is that it's about companionship, having someone to share your life with, someone to be there through the highs and the lows. Well, companionship is a huge part of marriage. It's only one piece of the bigger picture. Marriage, in its truest form, is more than 2 people walking through life together. It's about mutual growth, self-improvement, and being bound together in a triune relationship between husband, wife, and God. Here's the thing, true growth happens when you have a loving partner who pushes you to be better. Think about it. Who else in your life will call you out on all of your bad habits, challenge you to grow, but also be there to love and support you unconditionally through that growth? That's the beauty of a strong, God-centered marriage. A wife who loves you will not just serve you or be there for the easy parts. She will help refine you, just as you should refine her. Proverbs 27:17 says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." Marriage, in this sense, is about sharpening each other, pushing each other to become the best version of yourselves. Now, let's talk about how this works on a spiritual level. Marriage isn't just two people living together or sharing responsibilities. It's a covenant between you, your spouse, and God. Ecclesiastes 4:12 reminds us a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. That third strand, God, is what makes marriage not only resilient, but purposeful. When you're married in faith, there's a deeper level of accountability and growth. You're not just striving to meet each other's needs, you're also committed to living out the life God has designed for you both. Your marriage becomes a platform for you to grow closer to God, while also growing closer to each other. Let's take a moment to look at some empirical data that supports the importance of marriage in personal growth and happiness. A 2023 Gallup survey found that married people, specifically between the ages of 25 and 50, are generally happier than their unmarried counterparts by about 20%. That is a significant number. Think about that. A 20% boost in happiness just from being married. And we're not talking about fleeting happiness either. These findings suggest that marriage provides a foundation for a long-term fulfillment and emotional stability. Why is that? It's because marriage, at its core, aligns us with God's design for how we're meant to live. This data shows that marriage offers emotional support, shared life goals, and a stable environment that fosters personal and mutual growth. When you're in a marriage that's built upon mutual love, respect, and service, both partners are constantly working to lift each other up, to encourage one another, and to grow together in their faith. You're not just building your individual life, you're building a life together. And that life is grounded in the principles that God has laid out for us. When we talk about self-improvement in marriage, we're really talking about becoming the kind of person who is always striving for growth, not just for your own sake, but for the sake of your spouse and your relationship. It's about refining each other in ways that glorify God. You'll both bring out the best in each other, and that's why marriage is such a powerful tool for personal growth. It requires you to be selfless, to put someone else's need in front of your own. And in doing so, you become a better, more complete version of yourself. So, for those of you who are single or thinking about marriage, I want you to reflect on something. What kind of partner do you want to be? And what kind of partner do you want to find? Are you looking for someone who will just stand by your side? Or are you looking for someone who will challenge you and encourage you and help you grow to the person God wants you to be? I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the importance of having a partner who contributes to your personal growth. How can you build a relationship where both people are lifting each other up? If you're in a relationship right now, are you both serving each other in ways that will help you grow? If not, what steps can you take to strengthen that journey together? Remember, marriage is not just about surviving life together, it's about thriving together, growing in your faith, and building a life that honors God. All right, now let's shift our focus and talk about the ways modern society views marriage. It's no secret that today, marriage is seen as optional, maybe even outdated. What used to be regarded as one of the cornerstones of adult life is now treated as a choice, one that can easily be rescinded if it doesn't feel convenient. The idea of forever seems to have lost its meaning for a lot of people, and marriage is increasingly seen as temporary, almost like it's a contract with an expiration date instead of a lifelong commitment. Divorce rates tell us a lot about this shift in how society views marriage. While divorce rates have been declining, so have the number of people getting married in the first place. In fact, according to a report from the U.S. Census Bureau titled Number, Timing, and Duration of Marriages and Divorces since 2016, we're seeing fewer people getting married and more people delaying marriage until later in life. And when people do get married, nearly half of first marriages end in divorce. That number climbs to over 60% for all second marriages. So how do we square this with the data we mentioned earlier about married people being 20% happier? Here's the reality. Those who are in stable, committed marriages are generally happier, more content, and more fulfilled in life. But fewer people are even reaching that point because the idea of marriage has lost its weight. We've started seeing marriage as something you can easily exit when things get tough, and that undermines the very foundation of what marriage is supposed to be. If you don't see marriage as a permanent commitment, it's easy to give up when the road gets rocky. But the beauty of marriage, the growth, the happiness, the deep sense of fulfillment, comes from working through those tough times together. And when we look at the consequences of this societal shift, particularly for men, it becomes clear why so many young men today are struggling. Without the stability and duty that comes from a serious relationship, young men often drift from one vice to another, looking for something to fill that void. They're chasing something, whether it's success, pleasure, or a sense of purpose, but they're not finding it because they're missing that anchor. They don't have a sense of duty to another person, a commitment that pushes them to be better, to work harder, and to grow. Marriage, when it's built on a solid foundation, offers that anchor. It gives men a sense of purpose that goes beyond just themselves. Now, compare that to men who are in committed relationships, men who have a wife who loves them, challenges them, and helps them grow. These men are generally happier and more content, just like the Gallup survey showed. Their lives have a sense of direction because they're not just living for themselves. They have someone who depends on them, someone who pushes them to be better, and that brings a deep sense of fulfillment that you just can't find anywhere else. So, what's the disconnect then? Why are fewer people getting married if it leads to greater happiness and fulfillment? It's because modern society has convinced us that marriage is optional, that it's something that you can opt into or out of based on how you feel. The commitment, the duty, the sacredness of marriage, these things have been devalued. Instead, we're encouraged to focus on self-gratification, on personal freedom, and on living for the moment. But those things don't lead to that long-term happiness. They might give you a short-term satisfaction, but they will leave you empty in the long run. I want you to take a moment and think about how these societal views on marriage have influenced your own perception of relationships. Have you been led to believe that marriage isn't necessary or that it's something that you can take or leave? Have you thought about relationships in terms of how they serve you rather than how you can serve your partner? I challenge you to reconsider how you view marriage. Think about the stability, growth, and fulfillment that comes from a long-term commitment to something you love, and how that relationship, built on mutual service and faith, can change your life for the better. Now, I want to take a detour and dive into the historical context that really shaped how we view as a society the role of women and wives in marriage, specifically the idea of the quote-unquote housewife. You see, this stereotype didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was heavily influenced by post-World War II propaganda that idealized women as homemakers and painted a picture of family life that was meant to be a symbol of American success and superiority over other nations. In particular, this imagery was created as a counter to communism during the Cold War. After the war, women who had been working in factories while the men were overseas were expected to return home. Society, through media and government messaging, idealized that role of women as homemakers. Propaganda depicted women who stayed home as happy and fulfilled, while portraying those who worked outside of the home as failures of societal values. In this idealized version of post-war America, the perfect family meant dad was the breadwinner, mom was cooking in the kitchen, and the kids were safe and secure. This image was not just a symbol of domestic life, it was painted as a symbol of freedom and prosperity, a contrast to the dreaded life of working women in communist countries, where it was suggested women slaved away in factories while their children were left in cold daycare centers. So think about that for a moment. The idea of this perfect housewife was rooted in political propaganda, not any inherent or natural role for women. And yet it became the standard. From the 1940s to the 1960s, this was the dominant image portrayed in the media. Large families were typical, and domesticity was idealized. TV shows, commercials, and magazines all reinforced the image of women as submissive, always with a smile, happily serving her husband and children. Working women were often seen as selfish or failing their duties as wives and mothers. This stereotype was a product of its time. It wasn't necessarily reflective of biblical principles of marriage or servitude. It was an image created for a specific cultural moment. Yet, even though we know it was rooted in propaganda, the remnants of that image are still with us today. The idea that a wife's role is to be submissive, to serve her husband, and to focus solely on domestic duties has stuck around. It's easy to fall into thinking that's how marriage is supposed to be, even though that's not the biblical version of marriage at all. The 1950s housewife stereotype created this false narrative of women's roles in marriage, one of submission and servitude without that mutual love and respect. In truth, marriage is about mutual support, mutual love, and mutual service. It's about each partner helping each other to grow and to thrive, to fulfill their God-given potential. This stereotypical view of a woman's place in the home strips away the idea of marriage as a partnership and reduces it to a hierarchy where the husband is dominant and the wife is submissive. So ask yourself this: do any of these outdated ideals still affect how you view marriage today? Whether consciously or unconsciously, have you internalized the idea that a wife's role is to serve her husband in a one-sided way? It's important to reflect on these cultural influences because they can subtly shape the way we approach relationships, even if we don't realize it. When we think about the spousal roles today, we need to move away from this outdated model of submission and dominance and into what submission and dominance really look like. Marriage should not be based on stereotypes, but on mutual servitude and unconditional love, as we talked about earlier. When both partners are working together, they serve each other with love, respect, and honor. That's when marriage becomes what it is truly designed to be. So we've talked about how modern society views marriage and the historical context that shaped our perspectives. Now let's move on to another critical part of today's discussion. What does true spousal servitude really mean? When we hear the word servitude, it can often trigger negative associations. In today's world, we think of servitude as something akin to a master-servant relationship where one person holds all the power and the other is merely submissive. But let me clarify something right off the start. That's not what biblical marriage is all about. True spousal servitude from a biblical perspective is not one-sided, nor is it hierarchical. It's not about the wife doing everything for her husband while the husband sits back and gives orders. True servitude in a relationship is about mutual love, respect, and support. It's about serving each other in the way Christ calls us to serve others, with humility, selflessness, and care. Think about it. When Jesus washed the feet of his disciples in John 13, he wasn't just teaching them a lesson in humility. He was modeling the kind of love and servitude that should be at the heart of every relationship, especially marriage. He was showing that true leadership, true headship, and true love means serving each other, not just for personal gain, but out of genuine love and care. And that's exactly what we're called to do in our marriages. Now, this is where we see a huge contrast with modern dating and the way relationships are often portrayed in the world today. In his critique of modern dating, Marshall Segal, the president and CEO of Desiring God, argues that modern dating often sets couples up for failure. He says the trends in dating today are more likely to prepare you to get divorced than to enjoy and persevere in marriage. That's a pretty bold statement, but if we really think about it, there's a lot of truth to it. So many people today are approaching relationships with the mindset of, what can this person do for me? Or how can they meet my needs? Rather than focusing on how they can serve the other person. And when that's the foundation of a relationship, when it's about getting instead of giving, it's no wonder why so many relationships end in divorce. There's no mutual servitude, no commitment to supporting one another through thick and thin. Instead, people leave when the relationship stops serving them. Let's break this down further. In a strong biblical marriage, service isn't about meeting a checklist of obligations or bowing down to your spouse's every demand. It's about loving your spouse so deeply that you naturally want to help them, support them, and uplift them. It's about both partners coming together with the intention to serve one another, not out of duty, but out of love. And this is where marriage as a triune relationship comes in, between husband, wife, and God. When both partners are committed to serving one another as Christ served, the marriage becomes stronger. It's not dependent on selfish desires or personal gains, but on mutual commitment to one another's well-being and growth. Ephesians 5:25 says, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." Christ's love for the church wasn't passive, it was active, sacrificial, and selfless. That's the kind of love and servitude we are called to directly emulate in our marriages. The key here is that mutual servitude builds a strong biblical marriage that's built to last. When you're both committed to serving one another, not because you have to, but because you want to, because you love each other deeply, then you create a bond that's not as easily broken. That's why marriage grounded in mutual servitude is so much more resilient and fulfilling than a relationship built on self-interests or power dynamics. Now, how does this idea of service in relationships compare to the biblical model of mutual servitude? In the Bible, we see servitude as a reflection of Christ's love for the church, a love that is sacrificial, patient, and kind. It's not about control or dominance. It's about nurturing your partner's well-being, helping them grow closer to God, and being there for them in their highest and lowest moments. And this goes both ways. It's not just the wife's role to serve her husband, but the husband's role to serve his wife in equal measure. Here is something to reflect on. How are you serving your spouse or significant other in your relationship? Are you looking for ways to lift them up, to support them emotionally, spiritually, or practically? Or do you find yourself focused on what they're doing or not doing for you? Marriage is about mutual support, about each partner helping the other become the best version of themselves, both as individuals and as a couple. I encourage you to take time this week to really think about how you can serve your partner or future partner in your relationship. It doesn't have to be grand gestures. It can be small, daily acts of kindness and love. It can be listening when they need to talk, praying with them, or simply being there when they need support. Think about the biblical model of mutual servitude and ask yourself, how can I bring that into my marriage or future marriage? Now, let's focus on the concept of true love and service in marriage, a love that goes far beyond societal expectations. Going back to Ephesians 5:25, when we're given the clear command, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, this verse serves a powerful reminder that true love in marriage is not about dominance or control. It's not about following outdated, stereotypical roles where the husband leads and the wife just simply follows. Instead, it calls us as men to love our wives with the same level of selflessness and sacrifice that Christ showed for the church. Let's unpack that a little bit. Christ didn't love the church in a passive, distant way. He actively gave himself for the church. He sacrificed his own life out of love. In the same way, as men, we're called to sacrifice for our wives. That doesn't mean grand, dramatic gestures like laying down your life in the literal sense, though that is the ultimate example, but in daily, consistent ways to show love, support, and care. True marriage, then, is about serving your spouse not because you have to, but because you want to. It's about putting their needs ahead of your own, not out of obligation, but out of genuine love. This mutual service, grounded in love, builds a strong, lasting bond. It's a partnership where both husband and wife are equally committed to helping each other grow spiritually, emotionally, and in every aspect of life. I think it's important to contrast this on how society often views marriage today. We see so many depictions of love as transactional, where love and service are given based on what we get in return. You do something for me, so I do something for you. But that's not what true love looks like in the biblical sense. Again, going back to Ephesians 5:25, we're called to a higher standard of love, one that's unconditional and not based on simply what you can gain. Let me share an example from my own life. When my wife is going through a tough time, whether it's the stress from work or dealing with personal challenges, there's a temptation to focus on how I'm affected. Maybe her stress means we spend less time together, or it disrupts our normal routine. See, I'm an engineer. I love routine. I like the same thing every single day, day in and day out. But that's where I have to remind myself. My role as her husband is to love her through that, to support her unconditionally, even if it requires that personal sacrifice. It's in those moments that our marriage grows stronger. This kind of love rooted in service is what transforms a marriage, where both partners are committed to serving one another. It leads to a deeper intimacy and a strong connection. It's not about keeping score or holding grudges. It's about continually choosing to love and serve, even when it gets difficult. Now, let's think about how this applies to our own relationships, whether you're married in a serious relationship or even just preparing mentally for a future marriage. How can you begin to show this kind of love and service in your relationship? What are the ways you can support your partner, not out of obligation, but out of genuine love? True love in marriage, just like Christ's love for the church, is unconditional. It's about showing up for your spouse every day, even when it's tough. It's about the small things, whether it's making them breakfast, listening to them after a long day, or simply being present when they need support. And when that love is mutual, when both partners are equally committed to serving one another, that's when marriage truly thrives. But here is a strong reminder, this is not easy. It takes work. It requires humility, patience, and a willingness to put someone else's need ahead of your own. It's never convenient or comfortable, but that's what builds a strong, God-honoring marriage. We've covered a lot so far in Rule 5, focusing on mutual love and servitude in marriage, and how it's not about one person serving the other like a master-servant dynamic, but about loving each other in an unconditional and selfless way. Now, we're going to get really practical. We're going to discuss how you can apply these principles of mutual servitude in your daily life and relationships. Marriage and relationships are built on the small, everyday actions we take to serve and support each other. It's not the grand gestures or the big moments that define a relationship. It's the little things you do consistently. So, how do you foster that mutual servitude? Let's walk through 5 practical steps that you can start applying right now. The first step is simple. Perform daily acts of kindness. These don't have to be elaborate. In fact, the small, thoughtful things that you do every day will often mean the most to your partner. It can be as small as making them a cup of coffee in the morning, leaving them a note of encouragement, or giving them a compliment that boosts their confidence. What small act of kindness can you offer your partner today? The point is to make service a regular part of your relationship, not something reserved for special occasions. Kindness is an essential part of love, and it's the small, consistent acts that keep the relationship healthy and thriving. The second is to maintain open communication. Mutual servitude cannot happen without open communication. You need to know what your partner's needs are, and they need to know yours. This means creating an environment where you both feel safe to express your desires, frustrations, and hopes. Make it a priority to check in with each other regularly, asking questions like, "How are you feeling today?" Or, "Is there anything I can do to lighten your load this week?" When you communicate openly, you'll better understand how you can serve each other in meaningful ways. Communication isn't just about talking, it's about listening. Actively listening shows that you value your partner's thoughts and feelings, and it's an act of service of in itself. By being an attentive listener, you demonstrate respect and empathy, which helps strengthen your connection. Another important aspect of mutual servitude is sharing the mundane household responsibilities. Marriage or a long-term relationship shouldn't feel like one person is carrying all the weight. It's about teamwork. Make sure that the daily tasks are divided fairly so neither partner feels overburdened or taken for granted. For example, if your partner handles most of the cooking, maybe you can help take over the cleaning. If one of you is responsible for the finances, the other might take care of organizing household schedules. The key is to work together and approach your responsibilities with the mindset of partnership, not delegation. In Ephesians 5:21, we are reminded to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. In the context of household responsibilities, this means serving one another with humility, recognizing that both of you are equal partners working towards that common goal. One of the most profound ways to foster mutual servitude is by engaging in spiritual activities together. This could include praying as a couple, reading scripture, or attending church together. When you nurture your spiritual connection, you're also reinforcing your emotional and relational bond. Think about starting a daily or weekly devotional with your partner. This shared practice strengthens your relationship with God and with each other. Spiritual growth is a journey that is enriched when done together and gives both partners a solid foundation to rely on during difficult times. As Ecclesiastes 4:12 reminds us, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Serving one another spiritually can also involve offering to pray for your partner, helping them with their faith journey, or simply being a source of encouragement in their spiritual life. Finally, a key part of mutual servitude is supporting each other's personal goals. This could be in their career, their personal development, or even a hobby they're passionate about. Encouraging your partner to pursue their goals shows that you believe in their potential and are committed to their growth. For example, if your partner is working towards a professional certificate or pursuing further education, how can you support them? Maybe that means helping out more around the house to give them more study time, or simply being their biggest cheerleader during stressful moments. Personal growth is a shared journey in a relationship, and when you invest in helping your partner succeed, you're also investing in the strength of your relationship. The goal is not to sacrifice one person's dreams for the other, but to mutually support each other's aspirations. The point is to take action, serve in small ways that show love, build trust, and foster mutual support. And remember, it's not about perfection, it's about progress, one small step at a time. To really drive home what we've discussed, let's pose some reflection questions to help you think about your own relationships. Remember, these aren't just questions for those of you who are married. These apply to anyone in a committed relationship or even those preparing for one. If you're listening and you're single, think about the qualities you want to cultivate with future relationships. First, who in your life would you drop everything to serve, and why? Take a moment to think about that person, whether it's your spouse, a close family member, or a lifelong friend. What is it about them or your relationship with them that fosters that sense of devotion? Is it a mutual respect, unconditional love, shared experiences, or something else? Reflecting on this can help you understand what qualities matter most in your relationships and why they drive you to serve. Next, what strength do you bring to your relationships that enhance mutual servitude? Maybe you're a great listener, or maybe you're skilled at organizing and helping with responsibilities. Perhaps you have a nurturing spirit that brings comfort to your loved ones. Recognize the strengths you possess and consider how they might contribute to building a supportive, loving relationship. Understanding your strengths allows you to be intentional in your use of them to serve those you care about. Another question to consider is, how can you implement daily or weekly acts of service in your marriage or relationships? Reflect on what small, meaningful actions you can take to serve your partner or loved ones. It could be something as simple as taking over a chore they dislike, or leaving those little notes of encouragement, or actively listening to them when they just need to talk. Small, intentional acts of kindness can make a significant difference in fostering mutual servitude and showing love. Now, here's your challenge for the week. Take time to reflect on your own relationship and commit to serving those you love with intentionality, love, and respect. Write down 1 or 2 simple actions you can do this week to serve your partner, family member, or even a friend. It's about creating a habit of service and fostering mutual support. The key is consistency. Don't wait for a special occasion or opportunity to be grand. Small, thoughtful gestures done regularly can transform your relationship and build a foundation of mutual love and respect. And remember, you're not expected to be perfect or to have it all figured out. The goal is to keep growing, keep learning, and keep serving each other with a heart full of love and humility. True masculinity is about building relationships rooted in selflessness and faith, not dominance or control. As you go into this week, take those small steps forward, building stronger, more fulfilling relationships. Serve with love and lead with integrity. As we wrap up today's episode, let's take a moment to recap on those key takeaways from Rule 5, you cannot seek a wife who serves her husband. Throughout this episode, we've talked about the importance of building a strong marriage based on mutual love and service. A successful and fulfilling marriage isn't about expecting one partner to serve the other. It's about both partners coming together in mutual support, kindness, and a genuine desire to see each other grow. True masculinity doesn't lie in dominance or control, but in the willingness to serve your partner selflessly, just as Christ served the church. In my own life, I am constantly trying to apply these principles, never successfully, but I'm trying every day. For me, It's about aiming to build relationships rooted in that unconditional love and mutual support, even when it's not easy. This isn't something that happens overnight. It's a process that requires humility, patience, and the willingness to grow alongside your partner. Just like you, I'm on a journey to become a better man, and living out these principles is a big part of that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. How are you applying these principles in your own life? Or where do you see opportunities to foster mutual servitude in your relationships? Take some time this week to reflect on your relationships, and don't be afraid to share your journey. We're all learning and growing together. Thanks for joining me today on Chasing Masculinity. If you like this episode, please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Your support really helps spread this content, so make sure to leave a like. It makes a big difference and helps more people find the podcast. Also, don't forget to share this podcast with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from these discussions. We are going to build a community of men who are dedicated to personal growth, faith, and becoming the best versions of ourselves. You can also connect with me on social media. Follow me on X and Instagram at Mr. Wutzke, where I share more insights, reflections, and updates. Feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear your thoughts and answer any questions. Thanks again for joining me today on Chasing Masculinity. Until next time, keep chasing.